I discussed it yesterday in my Sunday paper column. I asked a question that parents, I think, are asking right across the country. Everyone wants to do the right thing by young people, but does that mean agreeing to irreversible chemical and surgical changes to teenagers who might just be confused or unsure about who they are and how best they fit in? I mean, this is the debate we've been having now for almost a decade, since radical gender ideology has crept into Australia. Two doctors with extensive work in child and adolescent psychiatry, well, they've just published a new academic paper that calls into question many of the practices surrounding gender affirmative medicine in Australia. And they are urging caution amongst medical professionals to resist the pressure from activists when it comes to our children. Now, given what we've seen from the Tavistock Child Gender Clinic in London, which has been investigated by the Parliament and since closed down, this is a conversation we've got to be brave enough to have here in Australia. Joining me now to discuss this is one of the authors of the paper, child and adolescent consultant psychiatrist, Dr. George Halas, and an adjunct senior lecturer too at Monash University. Dr. Halas, thank you for your time. Tough topic, one we can't shy away. Look, if a child came to you at the age of 10 and said, "Doctor, I think I've got cancer," no doctor's going to put that kid into chemotherapy. You do all the medical tests necessary. You'd make a professional, adult, expert decision. But when a child presents with gender dysmorphia and says, a little girl says I'm a boy or a little boy says I'm a girl, why do we go down the path of telling this kid, well, you're 10, you must be right, and put them on a path, in many cases, that's irreversible?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here, Peter. And you ask a very, very profound question to which there's many answers, but the paper that Andrew Amos and I wrote comes down to one conclusion, and that is that the affirmative model has a self-belief and a sense of certainty that does not allow any other conversation to exist. And so their position and the affirmative model is that if a child at any age, virtually even 3-4-year-old, declares themselves to be whatever they feel they are, the affirmation model says, that's certainly right, that's our starting point, and then they go on a different path after that.
We've seen, though, overseas that there's been a whole, reversal away from just affirming what a child thinks in terms of gender. They're urging now a more cautious approach. They've certainly done plenty of studies where they've shown that some of these children can be afflicted with other issues like autism that are skewing some of these gender results. And when those other things are resolved, they've got a greater sense of their born sex and gender identity, that these issues of dysmorphia fall away. Why are we in Australia using the old theory now and not the new theory?
What a great question. What we discovered in the paper that we wrote, based on the Tavistock experience, is that any questioning, including the very profound question you raised for doctors, that when a child presents with any gender issue, we must do a holistic, complete assessment of all possible contributions to that child's suffering. And I have to say that I believe that all of us are trying to do the right thing, that is to relieve children's suffering. However, the path of the affirmation, as practiced at the Tavistock, has ended in an absolute scandal. And as you mentioned, the Tavistock actually has been, that the Gender Identity Development Service has been closed down because it was found not fit for purpose. So when you ask, why are we following a path that has been proven and shown with evidence to be failing the service delivery, we all ask the same question, and that's why we wrote the paper, to engage the conversation in Australian community.
We find, though, that there's new guidelines out from the Royal Children's Hospital in Melbourne, and they back in this affirmation principle. They're backing in the prescription of puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones by GPs for children. As I said, and you confirm, the experts around the world are saying, well, let's be a bit more cautious. You're saying to your colleagues, the Hippocratic Oath, the first thing doctors swear, do no harm. Why is it being ignored?
You may ask again that I think that the affirmation ideology has such a sense of conviction in its certainty in being right that it even subordinates science and medical science under its sense of entitlement to be correct. Whereas the history of medicine actually marches with debates, conversations, some very heated conversations, but it allows a toing and froing of knowledge. And that's what we found that at the Tavistock was actually prohibited.
How concerned are you, though, that this culture of intimidation, you're right to point out that the story of medicine and indeed science through the ages is to test, it's to challenge, it's to resolve with fact, not sorcery and all the other things that have existed in the past. But that's being put aside and people are being silenced. Experts like you, I hope you haven't been intimidated, but I've spoken to plenty that have. Why is it on this subject common sense seems to be out the window?
Well, I think medicine is part of culture. And if I may say that I think that common sense is being thrown out the window on a number of fronts. And this is one manifestation within the medical fraternity over the last 10 or 15 years. So I don't think it's unique in the phenomenon in culture that common sense seems to be seeping out, and this ideological certainty that we know what's right is seeping in.